The truth hit me like a slap to the face. My son stood at the edge of the forest, tossed my backpack into the truck, and looked me straight in the eye. "Bye, Dad," he said calmly. "Go meet the grizzly." Then he drove away. I was 58 years old, standing in the middle of an Alaskan forest, with no food, no water, no GPS, no emergency beacon, and no weapon. The truck disappeared down the dirt road, its engine fading into silence. And in that silence, I finally understood something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't carelessness. This was planned. My own son had brought me here to die. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. The trees towered above me like prison bars. Somewhere in the distance, something large moved through the brush. In Alaska, that sound only meant one thing: grizzly territory. I stood there for a long moment, listening to my own breathing, feeling the weight of betrayal sink into my chest. I had spent decades providing for that boy, built my auto shops from nothing, worked myself into the ground after his mother died so he'd never feel lack. And this was how he planned to repay me, by turning my death into a financial transaction. He thought I would starve, or freeze, or get torn apart by a bear. And when my body was never found, he would inherit everything. What my son didn't count on was one thing: I didn't die. Now I'm sitting in a quiet motel room, hundreds of miles away from that forest, waiting. The heater hums softly. A stack of legal documents sits neatly on the desk in front of me. My hands are steady. My breathing is calm. My son is on his way back here right now. He thinks he's returning to an empty room. He thinks he's coming back to silence, to freedom, to money. Instead, he's walking straight into consequences. Outside, headlights sweep across the parking lot. I recognize the sound of the engine immediately. The same truck he used to leave me for dead. I don't move. I don't hide. I don't feel anger the way I expected to. What I feel is clarity. There's a moment in every man's life when excuses die, when love stops being blind, when you finally see people for who they truly are, not who you hoped they'd be. That moment happened for me in the Alaskan wilderness when my son told me to go meet a grizzly bear. And now, as I wait for him to open that door, I realize something else. This story isn't about survival. It's about betrayal. It's about inheritance. And it's about what happens when an entitled child learns too late that karma doesn't care about blood. Before Alaska, before the forest, before my son decided my life was expendable, there was a time when everything I did was for him. My wife Sarah died when Mason was 8 years old. Cancer doesn't care about plans or promises. One year we were arguing about paint colors for the kitchen. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway holding a paper cup of cold coffee while a doctor explained that there was nothing left to do. At the funeral, Mason clutched my hand so tightly his fingers went numb. He didn't cry. He just kept asking when Mom was coming home. I promised him something that day, standing beside her casket. "I'll take care of you," I said, "no matter what." I meant it. What I didn't understand then was how dangerous unconditional promises can become when they're paid for with money instead of discipline. I went back to work 2 days after the funeral. I owned one small auto shop at the time, barely breaking even. The mortgage on the building was 3 months behind. Sarah's medical bills had wiped out our savings. But quitting wasn't an option. Mason needed stability, and I was all he had left. So I worked 18-hour days, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I slept on a cot in the back office more nights than I slept in my own bed. My hands were permanently stained with grease. My back ached so badly some mornings I had to sit on the edge of the bed and breathe through the pain before standing. I told myself it was temporary. It never was. When Mason reached middle school, Sarah's absence hit him harder. He became quiet, withdrawn. Teachers suggested counseling, private counseling, expensive counseling. I didn't hesitate. Then came high school. Sarah had always wanted the best for him, so I convinced myself that the best meant private school. $40,000 a year. Tuition checks that made my stomach knot every time I wrote them. I told myself it was worth it. When he graduated, he didn't thank me. He didn't have to. Fathers don't keep score, right? College was next. Mason chose the University of Washington, not because it was the best program, because it was where his friends wanted to go. Dorm life, campus experience, no compromises. 4 years, tuition, housing, expenses, every dollar paid by me. I never once asked him to take out loans, never suggested part-time work. I told myself I was protecting him from stress, from struggle. What I was really doing was teaching him that money appeared when he wanted it. After graduation, he refused to drive anything used, so I paid $18,000 in cash for a new Honda Civic. He complained about the color. When rent became too expensive, I sent monthly transfers, $3,000 at a time, every month. No questions, no conditions. Each time I told myself it was temporary. Each time it became permanent. I built 3 more auto shops over the next decade. What started as survival turned into success. I was good at what I did. I reinvested profits, hired carefully, expanded slowly. By the time Mason turned 25, the business was stable, profitable, and fully paid off. He never worked there, not once. He said it was beneath him, said he planned to manage the company someday, not get his hands dirty. I laughed it off, the way fathers do when they don't want to admit something feels wrong. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. He didn't ask how the business was doing. He asked how much it was worth. He didn't ask if I was tired. He asked when I planned to retire. He didn't talk about building something of his own. He talked about what would be his after I stepped aside, after I slowed down, after I died. The first time he joked about inheritance, I laughed with him. The second time, I ignored it. The third time, it made my chest tighten. But I still paid, because guilt is expensive, and I was drowning in it. I had convinced myself that since I couldn't give him his mother, I could at least give him comfort, opportunity, security. What I didn't realize was that I was replacing parenting with payments. Every failure of his I solved with money. Every delay I financed. Every poor decision I cushioned. And slowly, without meaning to, I taught him something dangerous. That effort was optional. That consequences were negotiable. That I existed to provide, not to be respected. The night before he stormed into my office, demanding $5,000, I was reviewing invoices. Ordinary work, ordinary life. I had grease under my nails and a half-eaten sandwich on the desk. He burst in like I owed him something. No greeting, no concern, just demands. That was the moment the foundation cracked. Not because he asked for money, but because of how he asked. Like a creditor, like an owner, like a man already dividing assets that weren't his. When he said, "After you die, I'll run everything better," Something inside me broke. Not loudly, quietly, the way old structures fail after years of stress. Still, even then, I didn't act. I didn't cut him off. I didn't confront the truth. Instead, I let him leave. That was my last mistake, as the father who believed sacrifice alone was enough. Because the truth is this: I didn't raise a monster overnight. I financed one, slowly, over decades. And by the time I realized it, my son no longer saw me as a man. He saw me as an obstacle. The decay didn't start with cruelty. It started with indifference. At first, it was small things. Mason stopped answering my calls. When he did pick up, he sounded distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. Conversations became shorter, transactional. Did you send the money? Rent's due. I need help this month. No questions about my day. No interest in the shops. No curiosity about how I was holding up after years of working without pause. I told myself he was busy, young, finding his way. That's what fathers tell themselves when the alternative hurts too much. When I invited him to dinner, he canceled last minute. When I showed up at his apartment unannounced one afternoon, he looked annoyed instead of surprised. "Next time, call first," he said, standing in the doorway like I was a solicitor. That word stayed with me. Solicitor. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being his father and started being his funding source. The entitlement crept in quietly, like rust beneath paint. If I questioned a transfer, he bristled. If I suggested budgeting, he scoffed. If I mentioned work, he rolled his eyes. "You don't understand how things work now," he told me once. "This isn't your generation." I didn't argue. I paid. The first time he missed a payment and asked me to cover it real quick, I felt a twinge of irritation. The fifth time, it felt normal. By the 10th, it felt expected. When I delayed a transfer by 2 days because payroll had run late, he showed up at my shop furious. "You're messing with my life," he snapped. "Do you know how embarrassing it is when my card declines?" Embarrassing. Not frightening. Not stressful. Embarrassing. I was still wearing coveralls, standing beside a lifted pickup with oil dripping into a pan. Customers watched from the waiting area as my son scolded me like a negligent employee. I laughed it off in front of them. Inside, something tightened. The jokes started soon after. "You better take care of yourself, Dad," he said once, grinning. "I don't want the inheritance tied up in medical bills." Another time, over coffee, he tapped the table thoughtfully and said, "You ever think about what happens to the business when you're gone?" I told myself he was being practical. I ignored the calculation behind his eyes. The more successful my shops became, the colder he grew. Success didn't inspire pride in him. It inspired ownership. He talked about our assets, our future, our money. But he never said our work. When I suggested he spend time learning the business, he dismissed it. "Why would I do that now? I'll just hire managers later." Later. That word became his favorite. He never planned to build. He only planned to inherit. I started noticing how he watched me, not with affection, with impatience, like someone waiting for a slow process to finish. When I mentioned retirement, his eyes lit up. When I talked about expanding, he frowned. Expansion meant more years. More years meant delay. One evening after a long day, I mentioned feeling tired, just a passing comment. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You should probably slow down. Stress can be dangerous at your age." Concern would have felt warm. This felt strategic. Still, I did nothing. because denial is comfortable and responsibility is heavy. I told myself he would mature, that one day he'd understand, that all children take time. What I didn't realize was that time wasn't changing him. It was revealing him. The decay became undeniable. The night he demanded $5,000 like it was overdue rent, no greeting, no explanation, just expectation. When I hesitated, when I dared to suggest he find steady work, his face twisted into something I didn't recognize. "Why should I work?" he snapped. "You're sitting on all this money. You control everything like a dictator." Dictator. That was the word he chose. Not father, not provider, not man who sacrificed decades for him. Dictator. And when he spoke about my death, casually, confidently, as if it were already scheduled, the final layer of illusion peeled away. I saw it then. The dependence wasn't accidental. The entitlement wasn't ignorance. The resentment wasn't temporary. I hadn't raised a son who needed help. I had raised a man who believed my existence was an inconvenience. And still, even then, I didn't act. Because hope dies hard in fathers. Because part of me still believed that somewhere inside him was the boy who once held my hand at his mother's funeral and promised we'd be okay. That belief would cost me almost everything. The idea came from him. That should have been my first warning. Mason called me on a Sunday morning, his voice unusually upbeat. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "Dad," he said, "let's go camping, just you and me, like old times." Old times. He hadn't shown interest in anything outdoors since high school, but he talked about Alaska like it was a healing place. Denali, fresh air, no distractions, a chance to reconnect. I wanted to believe him. I ignored the timing, ignored the urgency, ignored the way he rushed me into saying yes. Everything was already booked, he said. Flights, gear, permits, no refunds. We had to leave immediately or lose it all. Pressure disguised as opportunity. I packed carefully. Old habits from my military days never leave you. Mason, on the other hand, showed up at the airport with brand new gear, still tagged, like a costume he'd never worn before. During the flights, he asked questions. Too many questions. About survival, about navigation, about what to do if equipment was lost. I answered them without thinking. Fathers teach. That's what we do. In Anchorage, he insisted on buying extra supplies. Rope, flares, high-powered flashlights. Things that didn't add up for a simple camping trip. The clerk at the outfitter raised an eyebrow. Mason smiled nervously. "Just want to be prepared," he said. Prepared for what? The ranger briefing should have stopped us. The park ranger warned us plainly. Remote terrain, no cell service, grizzly activity, rescue delays measured in days, not hours. Mason nodded eagerly. I watched his eyes track the most isolated areas on the map, places marked in red, places people didn't come back from easily. That was the moment my gut twisted. But I still followed him, because trust dies last. We drove deep into the park, past the last sign of civilization. Trees closed in around the road. The signal bars on my phone vanished one by one. "Off the grid now," I said lightly. Mason smiled. Perfect. We hiked for hours. He complained constantly, struggling with his pack, moving like someone who didn't belong there. That alone should have told me this trip wasn't about bonding. That night, he volunteered for first watch. That bothered me. He'd never shown patience, never liked being alone with his thoughts. Yet now, He wanted silence, darkness, time. I slept lightly. At dawn, I heard movement. Not breakfast sounds, not camp routine. Logistical sounds, metal, zippers, weight shifting. I stepped out of the tent into frozen air and saw him loading the truck, methodically, efficiently, all the gear, every piece. "Mason," I said, "what are you doing?" He froze for half a second, then straightened. Change of plans. My heart started pounding. Not fear, recognition. "We're supposed to be here 5 days. He didn't look at me. Weather's turning. It wasn't. I took a step toward him. "Talk to me." That's when the mask dropped. "You really don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "I'm done. Done with begging, with waiting, with you controlling my life. I've given you everything," I said quietly. "That's the problem," he shot back. "You gave me just enough to keep me trapped." Then he said it, calmly, precisely. "You're not coming back with me." The forest seemed to close in around us. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," he said. "You're strong, military man. You'll figure it out. Or you won't." I stared at him, searching for my son in his face. I didn't find him. "This is bear country," I said. "You're leaving me without food, water, or a beacon." He slammed the tailgate shut. "Should have thought about that before controlling my life." Then he looked at me with something close to satisfaction. "Go meet the Grizzly." The engine roared. I stepped forward instinctively, shouting his name, but he was already backing away, already turning his back on me. The truck disappeared down the road, dust hanging in the air like a final insult. And just like that, I was alone. No gear, no protection, no sun, just trees, silence, and the distant sound of something large moving through the brush. In that moment, the pain didn't come first. Clarity did. I understood exactly who my son was, and exactly what he thought my life was worth. Shock is a luxury you can't afford in the wilderness. The moment the truck vanished and the dust settled, something inside me clicked into place. Not panic, not grief, training. Decades earlier, the Navy had taught me a simple truth. When you are abandoned, you do not mourn, you assess. I checked my pockets. Wallet, keys, a small folding knife I'd forgotten I was carrying. No food, no water, no weapon, no beacon. Alaska in March doesn't forgive mistakes. I forced myself to breathe slowly, ignoring the surge of betrayal clawing at my chest. Emotion could wait. Survival could not. I listened. The forest was alive. Not peaceful, alive. Birds went silent in waves. Something large moved far off, snapping branches with casual strength. I made noise as I walked, remembering the ranger's warning. Never surprise a bear. Never move like prey. I chose direction the way I'd been trained. West meant roads, eventually. Rivers meant life. I followed terrain, breaking branches behind me, marking my path for people who might never come. Hours passed. My mouth went dry. My legs burned. The cold crept deeper as the sun slid lower. That was when I heard engines. Not trucks, not cars. A TVS. I froze, listening. The sound was deliberate, steady, not panicked. People who knew where they were going. I turned toward it and pushed through brush that tore at my arms and jacket. When I broke into the clearing, 4 riders cut their engines and stared at me like they'd seen a ghost. A bearded man dismounted immediately, eyes sharp, voice calm. "Sir, are you hurt?" "My son," I said, my throat raw. "He left me, took everything." The words sounded unreal even to me. The man's expression hardened. "That's attempted murder. His name was Oliver Reed, former park ranger. The others were guides, locals, men and women who understood what abandonment meant out here. They gave me water, real water. I drank until my hands stopped shaking. Oliver checked his GPS, frowned, then looked up. If he took the main road, he won't be back for hours. We know a ranger trail. We can get you to the lodge in 90 minutes. The realization hit me like electricity. I could be back before my son. For the first time since dawn, something like calm satisfaction settled in my chest. We rode hard through trails tourists never see. Emergency paths cut into the wilderness by people who expect the worst. I clung to the ATV, the forest blurring past, my thoughts sharpening with every mile. By the time the lodge came into view, my fear was gone. What remained was clarity. Mason didn't just betray me, he revealed himself. And now I had witnesses. I thanked them, took Oliver's card. He didn't hesitate when I told him I might need help later. "What your son did," he said quietly, "comes with consequences. Real ones." Inside the motel room, I sat on the bed and finally let myself feel it. Not sadness, grief. The grief of realizing the boy I loved no longer existed. I pulled the documents from my jacket. The will ID changed weeks earlier after his first explosion of entitlement. At the time, it felt extreme. Now, it felt inevitable. Mason would inherit nothing. The businesses, the accounts, the house his mother loved, all redirected. Charities, veterans, conservation. The irony was surgical. He had tried to kill me for money that no longer belonged to him. I called Oliver. "I need you tonight," I said, "as a witness." He didn't ask questions. When the headlights finally swept across the parking lot, I felt no fear, just focus. I sat in the chair facing the door, documents laid out neatly. My breathing was steady. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was prepared. Revenge doesn't require rage. It requires patience. After Oliver left to set up in the adjoining room, I locked the motel door and sat alone with my thoughts. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. Ordinary, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of place where extraordinary consequences are born. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Mason expected chaos, panic, grief. He expected to return to an empty room and a dead father. If he came back to sirens, lawyers, or handcuffs too early, he would shut down. Say nothing. Lawyer up. I needed him comfortable. I needed him careless. That meant silence. I turned my phone off completely. No calls, no texts, no notifications. To Mason, it would look exactly like what he planned. A man lost in the wilderness. A problem solved. Then I worked. I reviewed the will line by line. The language was airtight. No loopholes, no emotional appeals, no family exceptions. Mason's name appeared exactly once, listed as disinherited due to irreconcilable estrangement. It felt colder than I expected, but cold was appropriate. Next came the business documents, power of attorney revisions, contingency plans. Instructions that transferred operational control to managers who had earned my trust over decades. Men and women who worked, who showed up, who didn't wait for someone else to die to succeed. I left nothing for Mason to manipulate. Every asset sealed, every account protected, every excuse eliminated. This wasn't punishment. This was containment. I placed the documents neatly on the desk where Mason would see them the moment he walked in. Not hidden, not dramatic, just present. Like a verdict waiting to be read. Oliver texted once from next door. Recording ready, clear audio. I replied with a single word. Understood. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the parking lot lights hummed softly. Somewhere down the road, a truck engine passed and faded. Time stretched, thick and deliberate. I thought about the forest. Not the fear, not the cold, the realization. How easily Mason had said goodbye. How casually had sentenced me to death. Not in anger, not in desperation, in convenience. That was the moment I knew reconciliation was impossible. People don't come back from that. At 8:43 p.m., headlights turned into the lot. I recognized the truck immediately. Mason parked crooked, like a man in a hurry. He sat inside longer than necessary, probably rehearsing grief, probably practicing the right tone for the calls he planned to make. I took my seat, straight-backed, calm, still. The click of the key in the lock sounded louder than it should have. The door opened. Mason stepped inside, scanning the room instinctively for movement, for absence. Then he saw me. The look on his face was worth every mile I'd walked in that forest. Shock first, then confusion, then fear. Dad? His voice cracked like a boy's. "Hello, Mason," I said calmly. "Did you have a good drive?" He stared at me as if I were a ghost. You're supposed to be dead?" I finished for him. Silence swallowed the room. And that was when the trap fully closed. Mason recovered faster than I expected. Shock gave way to calculation. I could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes, recalculating timelines, revising narratives, searching for an angle where he still won. "You're alive," he said finally, forcing a laugh. "I knew you'd make it. You always do." A lie. And not even a good one. "You didn't look surprised when you left me," I replied evenly. He shrugged, trying to look casual, tossing his keys onto the dresser like this was just another argument we'd have over money. "I figured you'd figure something out. You're resourceful." Resourceful. That was his word for survival. He dropped into the chair across from me, leaning back, crossing his arms. Confidence crept back into his posture, like a bad habit returning once danger seemed to pass. "So," he said, "what now?" There it was. Not an apology, not relief, not guilt. Strategy. I didn't answer immediately. Silence has weight if you let it sit long enough. He shifted, then smirked. "Look, let's not blow this out of proportion," he continued. "You're back. Nothing happened. No harm done." I stared at him. "No harm?" He waved a hand dismissively. "You're fine. I didn't hurt you. You left me to die. But men like Mason don't hear that. They hear outcomes, not intent." "This doesn't have to get messy," he said, leaning forward now. "We both know why this trip happened. We just need to be honest about it." "Go on," I said. He lowered his voice like he was sharing a business secret. "You've been holding everything over my head my whole life. The money, the shops, the house. You control it all. I just accelerated the timeline." There was no shame in his voice, only irritation that his plan had been interrupted. "You're getting older," he continued. "Anything could have happened eventually. I just didn't want to wait around forever." Eventually. That word again. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, certainty. Mason believed he was still negotiating. He thought survival erased intent. "You know what the problem is, Dad," he said, standing now, pacing the room. "You act like money makes you powerful. But power is timing. And I almost had perfect timing. Almost." He stopped pacing and looked at the desk. The documents. His eyes narrowed. "What's that?" he asked. "Paperwork," I said. He stepped closer, scanning the pages. His confidence wavered for the first time. "What kind of paperwork?" "Estate planning." The word landed. I watched his throat tighten. "You changed the will?" he asked slowly. "Yes." His face hardened, jaw clenching. "You can't just cut me out because you're upset." "I didn't," I said calmly. "I cut you out because you tried to kill me." "That's dramatic," he snapped. "I didn't touch you. You don't have to pull the trigger to be guilty," I replied. "You just have to load the gun and walk away." For a moment, something ugly surfaced in his eyes. "You're overreacting," he said. "If this goes public, people will think you're crazy. An old man who got lost and blamed his son?" That was the hubris. The belief that truth bends to confidence. "You really think anyone will believe you?" he continued. "Nobody, no injuries, just your word?" I leaned back slightly. "That's where you miscalculated." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You weren't as alone out there as you thought." His eyes flicked toward the door. "What do you mean?" "Alaska has a funny way of keeping records," I said. "People, witnesses, GPS trails, conversations." His breathing changed. Subtle. Faster. "You talked," I continued, "out there. You explained yourself. You were very clear about your intentions." He stared at me now, uncertainty cracking the mask. "You're bluffing." I didn't answer. Silence again. He laughed, but it sounded thin. "Even if you did call someone," he said, "it doesn't matter. I'm your son. No jury's going to throw a man in prison because his dad got mad." That was the moment I understood something crucial. Mason didn't just feel entitled to my money. He felt immune to consequences. He straightened his jacket, regaining composure. "Let's be smart," he said. "You're alive. That's what matters. You undo the will. We forget this ever happened. I'll take care of you. Make sure you're comfortable." Take care of me? From the man who left me for dead? I looked at him for a long moment. "Mason," I said quietly, "you think this is still a negotiation." He smiled. "It is." I shook my head. "No. This is the part where you realize you already lost." Mason was still smiling when it happened. Not a confident smile, not a relaxed one. The kind people wear when they believe they still have leverage. "You're bluffing," he said again, tapping the edge of the desk. "You don't have anything real." That was my cue. I reached across the desk and slid the top document toward him. Not dramatically, not forcefully, just enough for him to read the header. Last Will and Testament. His eyes locked onto the page. "Read it," I said. He didn't want to at first. I could see the hesitation, the fear trying to push through his arrogance. But curiosity won. It always does. His eyes moved line by line. The smile vanished. "What is this?" he whispered. "This," I replied calmly, "is what happens when a father finally stops lying to himself." His breathing grew shallow as he reached the paragraph with his name. Or rather, the absence of it. "No," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't real." "It was filed this afternoon," I said. "Stamped, recorded, final. He flipped pages faster now, hands trembling. "You can't do this. I'm your only child." "You were," I said, "until you decided my life was expendable." His voice rose. "This won't hold up. A judge will throw it out." I nodded slightly. That's why I documented everything. I stood and walked toward the adjoining wall. "Mason," I said quietly, "there are witnesses." The color drained from his face. "What witnesses?" I knocked once on the connecting door. It opened. Oliver stepped into the room, camera in hand, recording light blinking. Mason staggered backward like he'd been struck. "Who the hell is that?" he shouted. "Former park ranger," I said. "One of the men who pulled me out of the forest you left me in." Oliver didn't speak. He didn't need to. The camera said everything. Mason's mouth opened, closed. "This is insane," he said hoarsely. "You set me up." "No," I replied. "You confessed." Oliver raised the camera slightly. "You explained your plan very clearly," I continued. "Why you brought me there, why you chose that location, what you expected to happen to me." Mason turned toward the door. "You can't record me without consent in Alaska," Oliver said calmly. "You can when a felony is being discussed." Mason's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of the chair to steady himself. "This was supposed to be clean," he muttered. "You were supposed to disappear." I felt no triumph, no pleasure, only finality. "You miscalculated," I said. "Not because you're stupid, because you thought blood protected you from consequences." He looked at me then, really looked. Fear replaced entitlement. "You wouldn't do this to your own son," he said desperately. "You wouldn't destroy my life." I met his gaze without blinking. "You destroyed your own life the moment you left me in that forest." He lunged forward suddenly, hands outstretched, voice breaking. "Dad, please, I'll fix it. I'll change. I swear." I stepped back. "You already chose," I said quietly. "This is just the result." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, closer than he expected. Oliver lowered the camera and nodded. "They're on the way." Mason collapsed into the chair, staring at the papers that now represented the total loss of everything he'd tried to gain through my death. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. Not defeated, exposed. The sound of the sirens finished what the documents had started. Mason's head snapped toward the window as the red and blue lights washed over the motel walls. The illusion shattered completely then. No more bargaining, no more pretending this was a family disagreement that could be smoothed over with apologies. This was real. "This is too far," he said hoarsely. "You didn't have to call the police." "I didn't," I replied. "The wilderness did." The knock on the door was firm, professional, final. When the officers entered, Mason tried one last time to regain control. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his jacket, and put on the voice he used with landlords and bank clerks. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "My father got lost while we were camping. He's upset." One of the officers glanced at Oliver's camera. Another looked at me. "Sir," the lead officer said, "is that accurate?" "No," I answered calmly. "My son abandoned me 30 miles into Grizzly territory, took all survival equipment, then returned believing I would be dead." The room went silent. Mason turned toward me slowly, disbelief twisting his face. "You can't prove intent," he said weakly. Oliver stepped forward and pressed a button. Mason's own voice filled the room, played back without mercy. "You'll figure it out, or you won't. Either way, I inherit everything." The officer's expression hardened. "Turn around," he said to Mason. Mason backed away instinctively. "Dad, don't let them do this." The word "Dad" landed too late. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The sound echoed louder than the sirens had. "This is insane!" Mason shouted as they led him toward the door. "Are ruining my life." "No," I said quietly. "I'm ending a lie." At the station, everything became procedural. Statements, timelines, evidence. The officers didn't rush. They didn't need to. Mason's arrogance had done their work for them. They charged him with attempted murder, reckless endangerment, and felony abandonment. In Alaska, leaving someone to die in the wilderness isn't negligence, it's intent. Through the glass, I watched them process him. The entitlement was gone now, stripped away by fluorescent lights and metal benches. He looked younger, smaller, like a boy who had finally learned that confidence doesn't override consequence. Detective Martinez sat across from me, flipping through the file. "This was premeditated," she said. "He selected location, timing, isolation. That's not panic. That's planning." I nodded. "He talked about my death like it was paperwork." She closed the folder. "I've seen a lot of family cases," she said. "This one's cold. Cold." That word followed me out of the station and into the Alaskan morning. The mountains stood indifferent in the distance. Snow caught the early light, untouched by human drama. Oliver stood beside me on the steps. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said. "Not today, but eventually." He nodded. "You did the right thing." I wasn't sure there was a right thing. There was only truth, finally acknowledged. Before leaving Anchorage, I met with a local attorney. We finalized everything: the will, the trusts, the foundations. Mason's name was sealed out permanently. No appeals, no emotional loopholes. When I returned to Seattle days later, a letter was waiting for me. From jail. 5 pages, tight handwriting. Apologies wrapped in excuses. Promises of change. Warnings about how prison would destroy his future. Not once did he apologize for leaving me in that forest, only for getting caught. I folded the letter once, then fed it through the shredder. Some betrayals don't deserve closure. They deserve distance. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in small moments, after everything else was stripped away. Back in Seattle, I returned to my routines: morning coffee, shop inspections, conversations with people who worked because they chose to, not because they expected something to be handed to them. The auto shops ran smoothly without Mason. In fact, they ran better. No tension, no entitlement, no shadow of expectation hanging over every decision. For the first time in years, I felt light. I finalized the foundation in Sarah's name 3 weeks later. Scholarships for trade schools, support for veterans, grants for wildlife conservation. Money redirected toward people who understood effort, discipline, and responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son tried to kill me for inheritance. His inheritance would now save lives instead. Mason wrote again from prison. Shorter letters this time, less anger, more fear. He talked about regret, about understanding now, about how he wished he could take it all back. Regret is easy when consequences arrive. I never replied, not out of hatred, out of acceptance. The man who raised his voice at me, demanding money, the man who calculated my death in bear country, the man who said, "Go meet the Grizzly," that man was not my son anymore. I grieved him the same way I grieved Sarah, quietly, privately, fully. And then I moved on. I started hiking again, local trails, safe ones, not to prove anything, but because I remembered why I loved the outdoors in the first place. The silence, the honesty of nature. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't negotiate. You respect it, or you pay the price. The wilderness taught my son nothing. It taught me everything. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. Love without limits invites destruction. And providing without accountability creates monsters. I used to believe a father's job was to protect his child from hardship. I was wrong. A father's job is to prepare his child to face hardship without exploiting others. I failed at that once. I won't fail again. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've been paying for someone's disrespect, if you've confused love with enabling, learn from my mistake, set boundaries, demand responsibility, and never assume blood protects you from betrayal. Because sometimes the most dangerous predator in the forest is the one who calls you dad.